I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. All the ways you can communicate with us right there at the bottom of your screen. You can email us. The address is thestory@kgw.com, or you can use the hashtag TheStoryKGW on Twitter, or leave us a voicemail. Give us a call on our phone number 503-226-5090. Now, I know this is going to feel kind of weird, but let's read an email together, shall we? Pretend that you're an employee at OHSU. You're probably facing a mountain of school-related debt 2 years into a global pandemic. This email comes into your inbox. The subject, OHSU Employee Benefits Plan. It's from benefit@ohsu.edu. Okay, seems legit so far. In response to the current community hardship caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, Oregon Health and Science University has decided to assist all employees in getting through these difficult times. Starting today, Oregon Health and Science University will provide up to $7,500 in assistance to all employees who are experiencing financial hardship as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Well, that sounds fantastic. Is it a fantastic offer, or perhaps a cruel test to see if maybe you would click on a phishing email? You know, the type that drains your account when you click on the wrong thing? Investigative reporter Evan Watson is here to explain it all to us.
Thanks, Pat. Yeah, this was actually a test organized by OHSU to see if its employees could avoid potential cybersecurity threats. For background, last month, after a real phishing attempt was reported, OHSU leaders sent a message to employees warning about suspicious emails and other scams. The university then decided to test its own, sending out this fake phishing email with the exact same wording as the previous scam, offering money for employees who might need it right now. As you might expect, a few people were upset with the misdirection, and today, OHSU recognized that. In a statement, the university said, in part, "We want to sincerely apologize to the OHSU community. The language in the test email was taken verbatim from an actual phishing email to ensure no one else fell for the scam. That was a mistake. The real scam was insensitive and exploitive of OHSU members, and the attempt to educate members felt the same way." An OHSU spokesperson went on to say the focus of this test was too narrow and they didn't consider the harm it would cause. Pat?
Yeah, I can kind of see where they're coming from. You know, if you have just your blinders on, you're thinking, well, we need to make sure that they are aware and sensitive of these things and don't click on this, but kind of missed the big picture in all this, don't you think?
Yeah, I talked with a few people today who said, hey, this just felt harsh. It felt like you gave me some hope here and they kind of pulled the rug out under from me. And then another person told me, hey, then I sat back after realizing it was a scam and said, oh, silly me, I shouldn't have expected this help in the first place, which almost felt more disappointing to them after that. But OHSU did tell me that they're putting some steps in place to make sure that they're going to proof these kind of cybersecurity, IT, tech threats when they send them out and try to figure that out moving forward.
And I guess kudos to them for eventually saying, yes, we were knuckleheads and we should not have done that.
They did admit that mistake, for sure.
All right. Thank you, Evan. Now to our big story. It's a follow-up on a rather bizarre story we covered several months ago about an event in Portland where people actually paid hundreds of dollars to watch a live autopsy of a human cadaver. Today, the Multnomah County Commission took the first steps to ban this type of pay-per-view event from ever happening again. A warning now, the video in this story is pretty disturbing. Here's investigative reporter Kyle Aboshi.
98-year-old David Saunders proudly served his country during World War II and the Korean War. After he died of COVID in August, the Louisiana man's family honored his wishes by donating his body to science. Little did they know he'd end up here, his body on display in a conference room at the Portland Marriott downtown waterfront, the centerpiece of a live autopsy and dissection before a paying audience.
So today we are saying enough.
On Thursday, the Multnomah County Commission took the first step to stop this type of pay-per-view event from ever happening again. A proposed county ordinance would ban the public display of human remains for profit.
We still have a lot of work to do, passing further legislation at the state and federal levels to ensure that there are stricter laws in place to prevent this from happening again.
Kimberly DeLeo, Multnomah County's chief death investigator, tried to stop the event before it happened last October. But police and prosecutors told her, as the law was written, there was nothing they could do. Video taken inside the event by our sister station King TV showed more than 24 people watching the dissection as part of the Oddities and Curiosities Expo in Portland. Tickets sold for up to $500.
It's extremely concerning and very troubling.
After seeing news coverage about the controversial event, a funeral director in Louisiana recognized the name of the man whose body was on display. David Saunders' wife, Elsie, spoke with county commissioners by phone.
I'm deeply hurt and frustrated that I was unable to save my husband from the violation of his remains. I was duped by selfish and immoral people for the sake of their personal monetary gain. Added to my grief for his loss is the vision in my mind of his naked and defenseless body being dismembered like a butcher preparing an animal carcass for sale.
The controversial event put on by an organization called Death Science raised ethical and moral questions. It also negatively impacted legitimate body donation programs, explained Tamara Ostervoss of OHSU.
It's incredibly harmful. Our program, for example, we support over 2,000 learners throughout the state of Oregon, and these sort of disreputable programs impacts their education, and it really impacts healthcare outcomes for future generations.
The proposed county ordinance targets the commercialization of displaying dead bodies to the public. It's meant to be a deterrent to prevent something like this from ever happening again.
Kyle joins us now. Kyle, what about funeral homes, medical schools, museums? Seems like there are some legitimate reasons that a corpse might be on display.
Right, there are. And the county attorneys who wrote this ordinance recognize that. They created carve-outs or exceptions for accredited funeral homes, museums like OMSI, and universities like OHSU.
This is so rare. Do we really need a law on the books about this?
Yeah, it is rare. But they want to make sure they never see it again. I mean, I've spoken several times with the man's widow in Louisiana, and she's devastated. It was hard enough losing a loved one, but then to have her husband displayed like this, it's wrong. Basically, a law on the books would be a deterrent and give officials the tools they need to stop an event before it happens.
Yeah, I can't believe we need it, but obviously we do. Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate it. The folks who want to divert tens of millions of dollars in the metro area to emergency shelters for the homeless have refiled their initiative petition with Metro. The governmental agency rejected their first petition last week on technical reasons. The backers changed one part and refiled it again this week. But according to a report from the Portland Mercury just a few minutes ago, it's been rejected again for a second time. Now, here's some background. In May of 2020, voters approved a Metro tax on high earners, along with companies which make over $5 million a year. It affects people in Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington counties. The money is supposed to be used to help end homelessness in our area. It's mostly being spent now on programs that keep people in their homes, the ones they have now, and a good-sized chunk, as much as $25 million a year, is being spent on overhead. The tax is expected to generate about $250 million a year for 10 years. The group People for Portland thinks things are happening much too slowly. They want voters to decide if we should divert 75% of that money, or about $187 million a year, to building emergency shelters of all kinds to get homeless campers off the sidewalks, out of the parks, away from underpasses and other places now. Under their plan, once there's enough shelter for everyone living outside and everyone is moved off the streets, the full funding would return to the programs that are getting the money now. As you might expect, not everyone's a big fan of that plan. Multnomah County Chair Deborah Kafori gave her final State of the County speech yesterday. She pointed out that under her leadership, the county saw the largest and fastest expansion of homeless shelter capacity in the history of Portland. Chair Kafori is also proud of investments that keep people in their homes now, things like case management and addiction and mental health treatment and long-term rent assistance. And while she did not mention it by name, she really left no doubt that she is against this plan to focus only on the emergency shelters to get the homeless off the streets now.
The reality of the county's work, however, is that with the depth and breadth of the need in our community, we have to make hard choices about where our resources go. Looking inward to my values and outward to the voices of those who are closest to the issues we're seeking to address, I've never shied away from the tension between meeting immediate needs and creating long-lasting change. I also understand that those decisions will leave some unsatisfied, and that comes with the territory. And while there will always be room for compromise on how we distribute our funding, our time, and our people power, I will say this. We cannot rely on Band-Aid interventions to actually solve our most pressing challenges and move our community beyond them, but we can move beyond them by listening to and engaging with those who are the most impacted, by co-creating solutions, and by humbly reflecting on crises and taking quick action to apply the hard-won lessons.
Now, a lot of that makes sense, and in my opinion, Chair Kafoury has done a really great job, a lot of great work, and if you live in Multnomah County, you should thank her for her leadership over the last 8 years. However, it caught my ear when the chair, toward the end of that clip, said we can move beyond our most pressing challenges by listening to and engaging with those who are most impacted. Now, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I wasn't sure exactly what she meant by that. So I emailed her office, and they were nice enough to explain that she meant people who have direct lived experience with homelessness or behavioral health issues, which means mental health issues. So talking to people who were or are homeless and who have or had mental health challenges. Now, I'm all for including those folks as we talk about solutions, and it would be ridiculous not to. But what about the neighbors? What about listening to you who rent or own homes in the neighborhoods all over our city, all over the metro area, who daily need to deal with the garbage and human waste that piles up at these camps, the untreated mental health problems that leave people acting out at these camps, and more recently, the shootings that sometimes happen around these camps? Why are you not a priority to be listened to as well? I think that's what's often missing in these discussions. And I think it's why the folks at Metro should be worried about that initiative petition, because if it gets to the ballot, I think it might pass. Now, I'm not saying you should vote for it or against it, but I am saying there is an anger in our community that is boiling over when it comes to this issue, and too many neighbors feel they've been ignored for way too long. That's my opinion. You don't have to agree with me, and often many of you don't, and you take great pleasure in not agreeing. But I would like to hear your thoughts on this topic. Do you feel like the county is listening to you when it comes to the homeless problem? Or are you thinking of voting for that initiative if it gets to the ballot? Or am I just full of hot air? Which is possible. Our email is thestory@kgw.com. Our phone number is 503-226-5090, where you can leave a voicemail. For those of you looking forward to commuting to work by ferry, don't get your hopes up, because funding for one in Portland just hit a big brick wall.
And what's the state of Frog Ferry at this point today?
I wish it were more promising, but we don't right now have a path forward.
We're going to take a look at how we got here when the story continues. Welcome back. Keep sending us your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com or give us a call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. How many of you are tired of driving or taking a bus to work and would really rather catch a ferry? Well, unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen anytime soon in Portland. City commissioners voted against giving $225,000 to a group developing the Frog Ferry. And without a lifeline, the project seems, dead in the water. Here's Tim Gordon.
A ferry plan for Portland has been building for about 5 years, with Frog Ferry leading the way. But now tensions between TriMet and Frog Ferry have boiled over, putting it all in jeopardy. I asked founder Susan Bladholm.
And what's the state of Frog Ferry at this point today?
I wish it were more promising, but we don't right now have a path forward.
TriMet is in charge of delivering $500,000 in state grant money to develop a feasibility study for the ferry, but it's only delivered $67,000. TriMet accused the nonprofit of inappropriate spending and billing practices, writing that Friends of Frog Ferry submitted certain expenses that do not qualify for reimbursement, included invoices that didn't add up and kept changing, and management costs that could not be considered reasonable or necessary.
I'm happy to address that. We have absolutely operated with full transparency.
In fact, Bladholm says TriMet is guilty of being unwilling to work with Frog Ferry while throwing wave after wave of requests its way for ever-changing documentation.
Before you today is a request for $225,000.
All that culminated in an urgent request of the Portland City Council to keep Frog Ferry afloat. At least a half dozen folks spoke in support of the system that would ferry people on the Columbia and Willamette rivers between Vancouver and Portland and possibly farther.
It'll expand our public transportation system.
Commissioner Mingus Mapps proposed the city bailout, but Mapps is not in charge of the Portland Bureau of Transportation. Joanne Hardesty is, and despite saying she is excited about the future of ferries,
I cannot in good conscience support this budget allocation when both TriNet and Frog Ferry are leveling such serious accusations against each other.
And so it went, and a majority of commissioners said no, leaving Frog Ferry high and dry.
This is a real shame that this grassroots effort and all of the private sector work behind this is getting nowhere.
Tim Gordon, KGW News.
So how did we get here? Indigenous tribes living in this area used dugout canoes to transport people and goods for hundreds of years. After white settlers came along, Switzler's Ferry started traveling between Hayden Island and Fort Vancouver. It was followed by many others starting in the 1850s. The Stark Street Ferry, Boone's Ferry, Shoals Ferry. You might recognize some of these names, but they went out of business as the bridges were built. Oregon has had more than 500 passenger boat services in its history. Now there are 3. In 2006, the city of Portland conducted a ferry service study and decided it was not a great idea.
The conclusion back then in 2006 was it would cost a significant amount of money. It would require more subsidy than buses or light rail.
But that was 2006 when the city was smaller and traffic was a lot lighter. The Frog Ferry was first proposed in 2017. Portland's Bureau of Transportation asked the City Council for money to study the feasibility of a ferry service. The council said no. But in 2020, the Frog Ferry got a $240,000 grant from ODOT and PBOT for that study. The study estimated a ferry would cost at least $40 million in upfront costs and require $2.6 million in annual subsidies. Last fall, the Frog Ferry made a test run from North Portland to downtown on a pilot boat. The group behind the project told us the first Frog Ferry vessel would be up and running by 2023. But now, the City Council is refusing to help fund the ferry, effectively killing the project. And that is how we got here. April showers bring May flowers, but what about April snow or hail or GRAUPEL? And what even is GRAUPEL anyway? Guess what? Coming up next, Matt Zaffino is going to explain when the story continues. We have had some strange weather this week, including historic snow in April, and I'm sure a lot of you have gotten caught in the hail showers or 2 of those this week. We got an email from Brian who wrote, I have a question for Matt Zaffino. With all the precipitation that's been coming down in the recent days, in my atmospheric science class, I learned about GRAUPEL as a form of precipitation as snowy balls that are smaller than 0.2 inches and that hail must be greater than 0.2 inches. The stuff that's been falling from these thunderstorms has been pretty small, seemingly smaller than 0.2, so I would assume that would fall under GRAUPEL rather than hail, but Wikipedia also says GRAUPEL is usually very soft and comes mainly from winter storms in high elevation. So which is it? I got to tell you, I have no idea, so that's why I'm so happy that Matt Zaffino is here to explain. Matt?
A lot of good information there. First of all, Brian, kudos for taking an atmospheric science class. Love that. And a lot of what Brian just said, or what Pat just read there, is right. But size doesn't matter as much in determining whether or not it's hail or GRAUPEL. So let's get into this. We'll start with hail because people are more familiar with that. And for that, you have to dig deep into the structure of the cloud itself. Usually big showers or thunderstorms where you have updrafts. So this is hail, mind you. So it starts with a raindrop or a water droplet that becomes frozen and is swept high up into the cloud by these updrafts. Now eventually it gets high enough in the cloud where the updrafts weaken so it's able to fall back down. But then it hits the stronger part of the updraft and it gets swept back up. And it will do this many, many times, and each time it does it, you get another layer of ice, and the hailstone gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it is eventually heavy enough to exceed the strength of the updraft, and it falls on down. We'll talk about hail size in a bit, because hail size does matter when it comes to damage, right? So that's hail. Now, GRAUPEL is very much like hail, except it begins with a snowflake, not with a raindrop. So, up in the clouds, you have snow, snowflakes, right? They fall. As they fall into a layer of what we call supercooled water. So that's water that is existing when the temperature is still below freezing. That's really quite common in atmospheric and cloud physics here. So it falls on down and you get the raindrops or that supercooled water freezing onto the snowflake. And as Brian mentioned, the end result is that you get these little tiny white balls and pellets that resemble small hail, but they're not hail. It's GRAUPEL. They're softer, as Brian also mentioned, and they're crushable. And you do get them in the mountains more often because up in the mountains, you have a lower freezing level. You've got colder air all the way down to the surface. So you see it quite a bit. I see it all the time when I'm skiing on Mount Hood, but we get it in town sometimes too. The harder part about getting it in the valleys is our temperatures are above freezing, so it will oftentimes melt as it reaches the ground, but not this week because the freezing level is so very, very low. So that's GRAUPEL, that's hail. I want to go back to hail size though for a minute because it matters when you talk about damage. So as we talked about, the hailstone will fall out of the cloud, and this doesn't apply to GRAUPEL because it's softer, but hailstones are hard. And pick your favorite sport and you can see the diameter of that sport's ball. Like a tennis ball is 2.5 inches in diameter, right? So the stronger the updraft, the bigger the hail has to get to overcome that updraft and fall down to the ground. If the hail is 1 inch in diameter or bigger, that is considered severe weather and severe hail. And you know what? It's pretty rare for it to get that big, exceptionally rare to get the 4.5 inch softball size hail, but it does happen. There was 4-inch hail in Georgia just yesterday. Rare, but it does happen. What's much more common is the small hail, what we've been getting this week, pea size. I saw some that was about marble size, so bigger than 1/4 inch. So Pat, everything you wanted to know about GRAUPEL and hail, probably way more than you wanted to know, but there you have it.
I was just thinking, Matt, our entire audience just got a class on cloud physics. Thank you very much.
You bet. Happy to oblige.
That was fascinating. Hey, keep sending your questions and comments to the story at kgw.com. We'll finish up right after this. For this week's Hey Help campaign, we're asking you to donate to the Free Clinic of Southwest Washington. They provide free basic health and dental care to uninsured people and low-income communities in the region. One of their big goals is to keep people out of emergency rooms, which is often where people do end up when they don't have health insurance. The clinic relies on donations and grants. If you'd like to help out, just hold your phone up now, your phone's camera, to the QR code on your screen, or you can go to kgw.com/heyhelp. This is a micro donation drive, so feel free to give any amount, no matter how big or how small. This week is the 52nd anniversary of the Apollo 13 mission. A few days ago, we talked to a Tigard woman who was married to Fred Hayes, one of the astronauts on board. At the time, Mary was 7 months pregnant and 200,000 miles away from her husband, who was trying to make it back to Earth after an oxygen tank exploded. If you missed this story, you should check it out. It's very good. It's on our YouTube page at KGW. But it also got us thinking about some great clips in the KGW vault. Years before that first mission to the moon, NASA astronauts actually came to Oregon to prepare. Scientists were looking for a landscape similar to what the moon might be like, and they found it in Central Oregon. In the mid-1960s, NASA sent astronauts to our lava beds to get familiar with the terrain and test equipment, and KGW crews got to tag along for some of the lessons.
But one of these writers has given you a fantastic tale. He calls his little booklet A Tale of Violence, 3 Sisters and a Bachelor. A few of the features that I want you to look at here, and we'll come back here, not to this particular spot, but to other spots nearby tomorrow, and get a little bit more appreciation of those, is to attune your eyes to pick out variations in the surface of the lava. Because if the Maria on the moon are composed of lava flows, as many people think they are, and possibly basaltic lava flows, which may be something like this, when you're 7 miles up and just about ready to tilt the nose of that thing down and land, well, you'll be looking for some soft, easy country to land on.
Pretty interesting, huh? That's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. But remember, the story, our story, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow.
This is KGW News at 6:30.